what they basically had to do is they had to cut my head all the way here open, and then they had to cut. So I would never want to lose my hair because I'd have an ugly old scar up there. But they had to cut my head open and then like put this stuff in there so that my head could have some movement so the brain could grow. My name is Tammy Lee Anderson, and I'm here sharing my near-death experiences. I've had 3 near-death experiences. The first one I remembered as a 17-year-old, but 2 of them happened when I was a baby. But I remembered them fully in an experience when I was 17. The third near-death experience happened when I was 23. So there was a church near my home, and I used to go there when I was 17. I just liked sitting in the quiet. I've always liked silence and quiet and attracted to prayer and stillness all my life. Even though I wasn't raised in a religious family, I've just had that draw to the quiet and to prayer. So I was 17 when I was sitting in a nearby church near my home, and there was a priest there that I had known because I had visited there quite often, and he came and sat next to me and he said, "Would you like a healing prayer?" He had a gift of healing, so he offered this healing prayer. And it was quite amazing because what happened was through that prayer, I remembered my first 2 near-death experiences as a baby. And it was like, as he started praying, I just felt this rush of memories, and it was like reliving it. Actually, it was like I was experiencing what happened. And so the first near-death experience was when I was born, and I had never been told this. And afterwards I verified these memories with my mother, and she verified all of it. In fact, she was in tears when I told her the experience. The first experience was my mother was 19 years old. She was in labor for 38 hours, and it was a very difficult labor. And apparently I was stuck in the canal, the birth canal, and the pubic bone was pressing on my head, and umbilical cord was around my neck. So my head was just flat as a pancake, I guess, when I came out, and I was all blue and from lack of oxygen. And so interesting because what I was remembering is not being able to breathe. And I was remembering sensory things like emotions of my mother. I was remembering emotions of my grandparents. And it was just an overwhelming sensory experience, this remembering of this death experience. I remember just being in a peace that was beyond, it's so hard to explain, but it felt like I was just being held in the light. And it was just peaceful, and I had no desire to return. And what I felt, it was like my mother was like a lighthouse, because she was just like drawing me back, her prayer. It was like a light in the distance, and I was drawn back through that prayer, through that will, desiring me to return. And it was just amazing. They finally got my heart going. And I just remember when they did that it was hard to breathe. And I remember the lights being overwhelming. I weighed 4.3 pounds. And so I was 2 months premature, and I went down to 3.3 pounds after that. They put me in a little incubator, which is a little bubble in the back of the room. At that time, there wasn't, at the hospital that I was at, there wasn't a prenatal care as they have it. This was in the 60s. So now they have all setups, and they usually put things over people's eyes, the baby's eyes. And it was just, basics then. Most of the time during those years, preemies would often die, which I did, but luckily they had an incubator in that hospital because it was a small hospital. So they put me in an incubator, put me in the corner, and my parents came once a week to look through this little small window in the back, and I was there for almost 8 weeks. So that was my first near-death experience, and I remember mostly from that experience is the difficulty in breathing, getting that first breath after coming back from a space of just complete, I guess I would say, bliss. It's just a floating into peace and then being drawn back into the body that was quite severe. So after that, I went home after 2 months, and I needed a surgery because the soft spots in the head had closed. My head couldn't grow. So either I would die or I would just be severely disabled. And so there really wasn't a choice not to have the surgery. And my parents made the decision. And luckily there were 2 neurosurgeons that had been visiting that hospital, and they were doing a talk on the exact surgery I needed to do. It was this brand new procedure that they were doing on this problem that I had. So that was kind of fortunate. They attempted to do the surgery, and what happened the first time at 6 months old, I was 6 months old at this time, and they attempted to do the surgery, but the anesthesia took me out, and so I died again. And what I remember about that was I felt returned to that peace. I felt surrounded by like light beings. They felt really familiar. It felt like home. It felt like just comfort and safe. And I remember watching the doctors trying to bring me back. And it was like I had no interest. But it was like interesting to kind of observe them kind of frantically trying to figure this out. It was like, yeah, I'm not interested. And then I don't remember, like some people will say they have memories of somebody asking them if they wanted to return. Nobody asked me. Just all of a sudden I was back in my body. And apparently they shocked my heart and did adrenaline and whatever to get me going again. What I remember is a stark contrast between the light being so soft and just feeling me to being back into these like surgical lights and bright lights and the frantic pace, and it was overwhelming. And that's what I remember most. I remember it smelling. I felt like it smelled like alcohol or some kind of, it just smelled strong smell in there. And I remember hearing stuff that was like loud, and everything was, I was overwhelmed by sounds of the surgery room. I was overwhelmed by the lights. That was the second near-death experience. Now they had to do the surgery again a few months later. They attempted to do the surgery again, and it was successful the second time. But I can't tell you if this was a near-death experience. I don't feel like it is. What I felt like happened in that surgery when they did it again, what they basically had to do is they had to cut my head all the way here open, and then they had to cut. So I have like, I would never want to lose my hair because I'd have an ugly old scar up there. But they had to cut my head open and then like put this stuff in there so that my head could have some movement so the brain could grow. That surgery they did 2 months later after the first attempt didn't work, and I died on them. And the surgeon, he came out and said, you know, there's no reason why she should be alive except she has the will to live. They did another attempt at this surgery. That time, I think that what they were trying to do is be careful not to use too much anesthesia again, because I have so many clear memories of all of it. I have to say, I wished I didn't remember that part because it was quite terrifying. I remember being really cold, and I remember just shaking, and part of the shaking was fear. Part of the shaking was it was really cold in the surgery room. And I remember the bright lights, overwhelming, and I remember the smells again, just all the chaos. It was quite chaotic. And I think that they didn't use very much anesthesia this time because I do have clear memories of this. At one point, though, it was very interesting because I remember being quite afraid, and then all of a sudden I felt that warm light come back into my awareness, and it was like I was in two places at once. I was in the light. I felt surrounded by, I call them light beings, but they feel like family. They feel like people that I've known forever in spirit, and they were there, and I felt much calmer, and the surgery was successful that time. And I don't remember this part, but when I did share these memories with my mother, she was just started crying. She had never told me and shared all this stuff with me, so it was quite in her face when I shared. It was kind of shocking, but she said, yes, they were waiting for me in the waiting room after that second attempt and the successful attempt of that surgery. And she asked the surgeon, you know, is she okay? And he said, does she sound okay? And across the hospital, she could hear me screaming. So, yeah, I was quite okay with that second surgery. So that was successful. And so then I just had to come home and heal and grow. And how that affected me all my life was I was sensitive to sound. I was sensitive to light. I was sensitive to emotions. I could feel people's emotions. Everything. It was like overload as a kid. So I often sought quiet places as a kid. I believe that it shaped my personality in a sense to be contemplative or be someone who is attracted to the quiet and the silence of prayer because it was something that gave me peace. So all my life I've had a contemplative side, a quiet side that would seek the silence and prayer. And I say prayer because it's just a word, but when I connect back into that light, all I have to do is take a breath and close my eyes and I'm there. And I've always had that since I was a kid. That my third experience was at 23 years old. It actually was several months before my brother passed in a car accident. I would often go into the mountains, as a teenager and young adult. Sometimes I'd be gone for a week, sometimes, just a few days. But this time I had been in the mountains and I was fasting. I didn't have any food and I didn't drink enough water and it was hot. And in this experience, I think it was caused by dehydration. I just went out of my body. I lay down on the ground and I just was out. And in that experience, the first thing I experienced was, it was like infinite number of light beings were going towards this light. And it was so beautiful and so loving. And it was just like, I was going with them. And all of a sudden I noticed my grandfather right in front of me. I could see his back and it was like Papa, and he turned around. My grandfather was a quiet man, but this experience was so amazing because it's like a merging, but you're still you. And that love between my grandfather and I was just like, I felt him, I felt his love, and it was just like, I knew more about him than I ever knew. It was not a knowing, it was a soul-to-soul connection. It was a blending. Boy, words fail at this point, but it was just absolutely amazing. And I asked him, I said, well, what's the truth about Jesus? Because I've heard so much and, what's the real truth about the story? Have you met him? And as soon as I said that, Jesus was right in my awareness. He was right there. And I had that same experience of blending with him. And it was just unbelievable love. And really, words can't even come close. I wished I could find words. It's like the best ecstasy, experience you've had joy you've had in your life multiplied by, a million. All of a sudden, I had this light being I call, but this was neither male or female, just this loving being kind of start to draw me away to the side. Then I was asking this light being all these questions. Why do people suffer? Why do babies suffer? All the bad stuff in the world. Why does this happen? And it was quite amazing because I was asking questions, what I felt like I was asking questions with my mouth, with my words. And then I realized I was asking questions so fast, I soon realized that I didn't have to form them as a word or a sound. I could just think it. And then it was like, as soon as I thought the question, I received the answer from this being. I really don't think it's telepathic. I think it's a soul-to-soul, being-to-being communication because it wasn't in my head. It was in my being. I understood everything. And then all of a sudden it was just like, it was like an explosion of light of different colors. It was like these darts of light started coming. It was like a major download in a sense of information, of understanding. And these light started coming into me, all different colors. And each piece of light, each light that entered was an understanding and knowing. So it was just a downloading this and everything made sense. Everything was perfect. It was like all the things I had wondered about in the world, it was perfect. When you're back in a body, I forget a lot of this stuff. I remember a lot of it though as well. It's like I've retained a lot of the information, but it's actually there if I tap into it. All I have to do is to sink into it. Because when I go into meditative states now, all I have to do is to blend into that and I can start to tap into that again. So it's quite amazing how I came back. Nobody asked me again. And all of a sudden, I was aware of a sound of a horse and it sounded like the horse was in my ear. And it was like, what is that? And so then that got my attention and I was back in my body and it was so heavy and dense. It was just the density. I laid there for hours on the ground. I had no energy whatsoever and it was just like heavy and the vibration was slow. And it was like going from an expanded state that's light and free, this freedom, this expansiveness to being in molasses. It was just thick. It was slow. And I thought to myself, boy, it's painful, but it's not painful. It was like just yucky to come back in that dense feeling and a slow vibration when you're so free. And I found out later this horse was about 1.5 miles away. So I don't know how the sound of that horse got into my close, like right next to my ear, but that's what brought me back. So that was that experience. It was quite amazing. And I talked to my brother after that, we went out to lunch weeks later, and I didn't realize then, but I was talking to him about this experience right before his passing. I've had all my life precognitive understandings, knowings. And when I get around people who are going soon, who are passing soon, I feel they're going away. And with my brother, every time he'd turn away from me and I'd see his back, for months before he passed, it was like this feeling of he's going away and he's not coming back. And I told my mother, I said, I get this feeling every time he turns around, he's not coming back. He's going away. And she got nervous and she wanted to get rid of the motorcycles. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but that feeling was overwhelming. So the day he passed, I was at the house and he was getting on his motorcycle and he didn't have his helmet. And I said, hey, where's your helmet? And he said, oh, okay. And so he went back and got his helmet, put the visor up, and he said, goodbye, I love you. And it was like somebody punched me in the stomach. I had lost my breath and I couldn't say anything. I just stared at him like in a daze. And I knew that that was the last time I was going to see him. And I couldn't say anything. But these experiences of feeling people pass or going to pass soon has happened all my life. Even if I can be in a store or something, walk past from somebody and I can feel them, like it's almost like they're half here and half gone. They're like in between. And I'm familiar with that space in between because I hang out there a lot in my prayers and meditation. And when I was 17, I had experience when I was sitting waiting for this priest had the gift of healing that I knew. And he was praying for somebody and I didn't know who he was praying for in the next room. But I decided to go into a meditative state and I sat there on the couch and I decided whoever he's praying for, I'm going to join that prayer for healing. And all of a sudden I saw this little girl in front of me and she was about 7 years old and she was surrounded by light. And I knew that this was who he was praying for. And I knew that she was going away. And she told me her name. She said her name was Cassie. And at first I thought it was Lassie. And I said, it sounds like a dog and dog's name. And she said, no, Cassie. So I told my sister, let's look in the paper the next few days. I didn't tell my friend, the priest, because I didn't want him to think I was really out there. But I told my sister, I said, let's look in the paper the next few days because this little girl is going to pass. And sure enough, she did and found her name. And she was a little girl, about 7 years old, I believe. It's been a long time now. But her name was Cassie, a nickname for Catherine. Now, at the end part of my life, I've culminated all of my life experiences and this experience into a mediumship. And so I connect with those who've passed through mediumship. And that's my work now. And healing. And basically, those experiences I've held in my heart most of my life now. I've only just begun to tell people about this experience because it's not an easy thing to share because there's really not a lot of words to share what it's like. But I'm attempting now. And I know that a lot of people listen to near-death experiencers. And what I want to say is that this is not far from any of us. We don't necessarily need to lose our body to experience this peace, this joy, this connection. Because now when I do my healing with people, I really attempt to take them to that place where we can all connect there and basically through the body. You know, I know a lot of people are attempting to get out of the body, but the body is also a portal. The body is an entryway too. And how I explain this is if you go into your body, like if I said, go into your right foot, and you take all your awareness into your right foot. And the further you go in, you see the muscles, you see the bones, you see the blood vessels, you see the nerves. But the further you go in, the more space you find. And it's in that spaciousness, it's in that aspect of us that's never been born, will never die. That aspect of us that has no boundaries. That's the essence of all of us. And so it's not just for people who've had the physical experience of, you know, their body dying. Everyone can tap into this vast experience of who you really are. And I would just say, do this practice of going in and experiencing the sensations within your body, and go in, go in, go in. Further you go in, the more space you find. And as you expand into that aspect of you that has no boundaries, that is fluid, that is spacious, that is free. And you start tapping into that freeness, you start tapping into that love.